The champagne glass slipped from Rebecca's trembling fingers as she stared at the newspaper. Headline: Tech mogul Ethan Crawford announces engagement to socialite Victoria Ashworth. The photograph showed them at some glamorous charity gala, her diamond ring catching the camera's flash like a tiny star. Rebecca's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly, where their secret grew beneath her worn waitress uniform. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Martinez had always believed that love could conquer anything. Growing up in the cramped apartment above her grandmother's bakery in Queens, she'd watched her abuela knead hope into every loaf of bread, insisting that hard work and a pure heart would eventually lead to happiness. At 23, Rebecca still carried that optimism, even as she balanced 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. The morning everything changed like any other. Rebecca arrived at Pinnacle Tower at 5:30 a.m. for her cleaning shift, her sneakers squeaking against the marble floors of the 42nd floor. The executive offices always felt like a different world, all glass and steel and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. She'd been working the building for 2 years, invisible to the suits who rushed past her with their Bluetooth headsets and leather briefcases. Ethan Crawford's office was her last stop, and she always saved it for when the building was empty. The CEO of Crawford Technologies had a reputation for arriving early and staying late, but never this early. So when she pushed open the heavy oak door and found him slumped over his desk, still in yesterday's wrinkled shirt, she froze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crawford," she whispered, backing toward the door. "I can come back later." He looked up with bloodshot eyes, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "No, it's fine. I was just leaving anyway." But he didn't move. Instead, he stared at the scattered papers on his desk with the expression of a man drowning in his own success. Rebecca should have left then. Should have followed protocol and pretended she hadn't seen the most powerful man in the building looking so utterly defeated. But something in his posture reminded her of her younger brother, when he'd lost his scholarship, the same hollow desperation that came from having the weight of everyone's expectations crushing down on you. "Are you okay?" The words slipped out. Before she could stop them, Ethan's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his features. In the 2 years she'd been cleaning his office, they'd never exchanged more than polite nods. She was just another invisible service worker in his world of corporate titans and million-dollar deals. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Rebecca set down her cleaning supplies and took a tentative step forward. "Sometimes talking helps. My abuela always said problems shared are problems." "Halved. Your grandmother sounds wise." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "I don't think I even know your name." "Rebecca Martinez, Ethan Crawford." He extended his hand with a self-deprecating smile. "Though I suppose you already knew that." "The name on the building was a pretty big clue," she said, and was rewarded with his first genuine laugh. That conversation lasted 3 hours. Ethan told her about the impossible expectations, the board members breathing down his neck about the merger with Ashworth Industries, the way success felt more like a prison than a prize. Rebecca found herself sharing stories about her grandmother's bakery, about working 3 jobs to support her family after her parents died in a car accident, about dreams deferred but never abandoned. When the sun finally rose over Manhattan, painting the office in golden light, they both realized something had shifted. The careful boundaries between their worlds had crumbled in the space of a single conversation. "I should go," Rebecca said, suddenly aware of how long she'd been there. "The day shift will be arriving soon." Rebecca. Her name sounded different when he said it, weighted with something she couldn't quite identify. Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Real coffee, not the terrible stuff from the break room. She should have said no. Should have recognized the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Instead, she found herself nodding, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Their first real date was at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glass towers of Manhattan, where someone might recognize him. Ethan arrived in jeans and a baseball cap, looking younger and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, her dreams of opening her own bakery, his childhood in Connecticut where he'd felt like a disappointment to a father who'd built an empire from nothing. "I never wanted the company," he admitted over his third cup of coffee. "I wanted to be a teacher, high school math." Can you imagine? The great Jonathan Crawford's son choosing a classroom over a boardroom. "There's nothing wrong with teaching," Rebecca said. "Teachers change lives every day. That's more valuable than any profit margin." He stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I believe people matter more than money, always." That night, he walked her to the subway station, their hands brushing as they talked. When the train arrived, he caught her fingers in his, holding her back for just a moment. "I haven't felt this normal in years," he said. "Thank you for that." The next few months passed in a blur of secret meetings and stolen moments. They met in quiet restaurants in Queens, took long walks through Central Park when it was too dark for anyone to recognize him, spent lazy Sunday afternoons in her tiny apartment above the bakery where she still helped her grandmother on weekends. Ethan seemed to come alive in her world. He'd roll up his sleeves and help knead dough, listening to her grandmother's stories about the old country while Flour dusted his expensive watch. He'd sit at the scarred wooden table in their kitchen, eating homemade tamales and laughing at stories about Rebecca's childhood mishaps. "This feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset from her fire escape. "That's because it is home," she replied, curling against his side. "Home isn't a place. It's the people who love you no matter what." But their bubble couldn't last forever. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning when Rebecca arrived at Pinnacle Tower to find Victoria Ashworth waiting in Ethan's office. Tall, blonde, and perfectly polished, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her designer dress probably cost more than Rebecca made in 6 months. "The cleaning girl can wait," Victoria said dismissively when Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "We have important business to discuss." Rebecca retreated, but not before she heard Victoria's cutting voice. "Daddy says the merger documents are ready. All we need is a date for the engagement announcement." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Engagement, merger. She realized with sickening clarity that she'd been living in a fantasy. Whatever was between her and Ethan, it could never compete with the weight of family expectations and business obligations. That night, she waited for him at their usual cafe, practicing the words she needed to say. When he arrived, his face was drawn with exhaustion. "I'm sorry I'm late." Victoria wanted to discuss the engagement, Rebecca finished quietly. The color drained from his face. "Rebecca, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty straightforward. You're engaged to Victoria Ashworth. Congratulations. It's not what you think. It's complicated. The company, the merger my father arranged this years ago. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. And what am I, Ethan? A hobby? Something to pass the time between board meetings? No." The word came out fierce, desperate. "You're everything. You're the only real thing in my life, but not real enough to choose your company." He reached for her hands across the table, but she pulled away. "Rebecca, please. Give me time. I can figure this out. There has to be a way. There is a way. You choose. But we both know what choice you'll make." She stood up, tears blurring her vision. "Goodbye, Ethan." "Rebecca, wait." But she was already walking away, her heart breaking with every step. The next morning, she submitted her resignation to the cleaning company. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing him every day, of being reminded of what they'd had and lost. She picked up extra shifts at the diner and the grocery store, throwing herself into work until she was too exhausted to think. 3 weeks later, she realized she'd been so consumed with heartbreak that she'd missed the obvious signs, the morning sickness she'd attributed to stress, the exhaustion that went bone deep, the way her uniforms had started fitting differently. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. Rebecca stared at it for a long time, sitting on the bathroom floor of her tiny apartment. She thought about calling him, about the look on his face when she told him. But then she remembered Victoria Ashworth's dismissive voice, the engagement announcement that was probably already being planned. Ethan had made his choice. Now she had to make hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't tell anyone except her grandmother, who held her close and whispered prayers in Spanish. "Mia," she said gently, "this baby is a blessing, no matter how it came to be." Rebecca threw herself into preparing for single motherhood. She saved every penny, took prenatal vitamins religiously, and tried not to think about gray eyes and gentle hands. When well-meaning customers at the diner asked about the father, she simply said he wasn't in the picture. The engagement announcement appeared in the society pages 6 weeks later. The photograph showed Ethan and Victoria at the Metropolitan Opera, her hand positioned prominently to display a ring that probably cost more than Rebecca's car. They looked perfect together, the golden couple, heir to business dynasties, beautiful and untouchable. Rebecca cut out the article and kept it in her jewelry box, a reminder of how different their worlds truly were. She told herself she was over him, that what they'd had was just a beautiful dream. But late at night, when the baby kicked against her ribs, she sometimes whispered stories about a man who'd wanted to be a teacher, who'd found peace in a grandmother's kitchen, who'd made her feel like she was worth choosing. As her pregnancy progressed, Rebecca's body changed in ways that made hiding it impossible. She had to quit her job at the upscale restaurant, where her growing belly didn't fit the image they wanted to project. The diner was more understanding, but the long hours on her feet became increasingly difficult. "You should tell him," her best friend Maria urged during one of their weekly coffee dates. "He has a right to know he's going to be a father. He has a right to the life he chose," Rebecca replied, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "And I have a right to raise my child without the complications that would come with involving him." But sometimes, in her weaker moments, she imagined what it would be like. Imagined him holding their baby, teaching a toddler to walk, being the father she knew he could be. The dreams were sweet torture, and she learned to push them away before they could take root. The wedding preparations were apparently in full swing. According to the society columns, Rebecca couldn't seem to stop reading. Spring ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Reception at the Plaza. 500 of New York's most influential people. Everything was perfectly orchestrated, exactly as she'd expected. Rebecca was 8 months pregnant when she saw him again. She was leaving her prenatal appointment at the clinic, moving slowly down the sidewalk with one hand pressed to her lower back when a familiar voice called her name. "Rebecca?" She turned, and there he was. Ethan Crawford, looking exactly as handsome and unreachable as ever in his perfectly tailored suit. But his eyes looked haunted. "My God," he breathed, his gaze dropping to her unmistakably pregnant form. I'm fine," she said quickly, wrapping her jacket more tightly around herself as if she could somehow hide what was obvious. "How are you? How's the wedding planning going?" But he wasn't listening. He was staring at her belly with an expression she couldn't read: shock, wonder, and something that might have been hope. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "is that baby mine?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Rebecca's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the entire street could hear it. Ethan's face had gone pale, his usually composed demeanor cracking as he waited for her answer. "It doesn't matter," she said finally, stepping back from him. "You made your choice 8 months ago. That's not an answer." A taxi honked aggressively behind them, and Rebecca realized they were blocking the sidewalk. People streamed around them with typical New York indifference, but she felt exposed, vulnerable. This wasn't how she'd imagined this conversation, if she'd ever imagined it at all. "I have to go," she said, turning toward the subway entrance. "Rebecca, please." He caught up to her in 3 quick strides. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." "You're getting married in 6 weeks. Congratulations, by the way. I saw the announcement in the Times. Very romantic." The bitterness in her voice seemed to physically wound him. "It's not what you think. It never is with you, is it?" She paused at the top of the subway steps, one hand gripping the railing for support. The baby had been particularly active today, and her back arched something fierce. "Look, Ethan, we had something beautiful once. Let's not ruin it by pretending it was more than it was." "More than it was?" His voice rose, causing a few passers-by to glance their way. "Rebecca, I love you. I've loved you since that first morning in my office when you asked if I was okay. No one had asked me that in years." The words she'd dreamed of hearing for months now felt like salt in an open wound. Love isn't enough. It never was. She descended into the subway before he could respond, leaving him standing on the sidewalk above. Only when she was safely seated on the train did she allow herself to cry. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She packed her small apartment, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby seemed to be doing gymnastics. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face when he'd spotted her pregnancy. The shock, yes, but also something else. Something that looked dangerously like joy. Her phone buzzed constantly, call after call from his number. She let them all go to voicemail, but couldn't bring herself to listen to the messages. Whatever he had to say, it was 8 months too late. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca opened her apartment door to find an elegant woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. She had Ethan's eyes and his stubborn jawline. "You must be Rebecca," the woman said. "I'm Margaret Crawford, Ethan's mother." Rebecca's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "Mrs. Crawford, may I come in? We have quite a bit to discuss." Against her better judgment, Rebecca stepped aside. Margaret Crawford moved through the small apartment with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating spaces and finding them wanting. "Charming," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. She settled delicately on Rebecca's second hand sofa, as if afraid it might contaminate her designer suit. "My son tells me you're expecting his child. He had no right to tell you that. He had every right. And I have every right to protect my family's interests." Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Miss Martinez, what exactly do you want?" "I want you to leave. Come now, let's be adults about this. Everyone has a price. Name yours." The casual cruelty of the statement took Rebecca's breath away. "You think I'm trying to extort money from your son, aren't you? A poor girl from Queens, suddenly pregnant with the heir to a fortune? It's rather convenient, don't you think?" Rebecca stood up, her hands shaking with anger. Get out of my home right now." Margaret remained seated, unperturbed. "I've done my research. On you, Miss Martinez. 3 jobs, elderly grandmother to support, medical bills from your parents' accident still outstanding. $50,000 would solve a lot of problems. Not for sale. 100,000. Get out. 200,000. Cash, all you have to do is disappear. Move to another city, start fresh. The child will want for nothing, I'll see to that personally. But you stay away from my son." Rebecca walked to the door and held it open. I said, "Get out." Margaret finally stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. "You're making a mistake, Miss Martinez. My son is marrying Victoria Ashworth in 5 weeks. That wedding represents a $40 million merger that will secure hundreds of jobs. Are you really selfish enough to destroy all of that for your own emotional needs?" "I'm not destroying anything. I haven't contacted your son once since we broke up. He found me yesterday, not the other way around. But now that he knows about the baby, he'll do something foolish. Something that will ruin everything we've worked for." Margaret paused in the doorway. "Think about what I've said. The offer stands until tomorrow night." After she left, Rebecca sank onto her couch and finally allowed herself to listen to Ethan's voicemails. His voice was raw with emotion, pleading with her to call him back, to give him a chance to explain. The last message had come in just an hour ago. "Rebecca, I know you don't want to talk to me, but please. My mother just told me what she did. I'm so sorry. I never asked her to interfere. Please call me. We need to figure this out together." But there was nothing to figure out. Margaret Crawford had made the situation crystal clear. Ethan's wedding wasn't just about love, it was about business, about hundreds of people's livelihoods. How could Rebecca compete with that? How could she be responsible for destroying so much? She called Maria instead. "That witch offered you money to disappear?" Maria's voice crackled with outrage through the phone. "Please tell me you didn't take it." "Of course I didn't take it. But Maria, what if she's right? What if I'm being selfish?" "Selfish? You've been raising this baby alone for 8 months without asking him for a dime. How is that selfish?" "Because now he knows. And according to his mother, that knowledge is going to make him do something stupid that will hurt a lot of people. That's his choice to make, not yours. And definitely not his mother's." But Rebecca couldn't shake Margaret's words. That night, she researched Crawford Technologies, reading everything she could find about the Ashworth merger. The deal would indeed create hundreds of jobs, expand the company internationally, and secure its position as a leader in sustainable technology. The wedding was more than just a society event, it was the final seal on a business partnership. That had been years in the making. How could she stand in the way of that? The next evening, Rebecca made her decision. She called the number Margaret had left and agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Midtown. The older woman arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase. "I knew you'd come to your senses," Margaret sighed, sliding an envelope across the table. "200,000, as promised. There's also a plane ticket to Portland and the contact information for a job with one of our subsidiary companies. Excellent benefits, including health insurance for you and the baby." Rebecca stared at the envelope without touching it. "I have conditions. I'm listening. This money goes into a trust fund for my child. I don't want a penny of it for myself. And when the baby is old enough, if they want to know about their father, you won't stand in the way." Margaret's lips tightened. "Agreed. Anything else?" "I want your word that you'll never tell Ethan about this conversation. He can't know that you paid me to leave. He won't hear it from me. Though I suspect he'll figure it out eventually. My son isn't stupid." Rebecca picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a cashier's check and a first-class plane ticket for the following morning. "I'll need time to pack. Of course. The job starts Monday. Your supervisor is expecting you." As Margaret gathered her things to leave, she paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Martinez, I believe you genuinely care for my son. But caring isn't enough to bridge the gap between your worlds. You're doing the right thing." Rebecca wasn't so sure. That night, she packed her few belongings and wrote a letter to her grandmother, explaining everything. Abuela would be heartbroken, but she'd understand. She always understood. She also wrote a letter to Ethan, one she knew she'd never send. In it, she told him everything, how much she'd loved him, how sorry she was for leaving without explanation, how she hoped he'd find happiness with Victoria. She wrote about their baby, about the dreams she had for their future, about the sacrifice she was making to protect his world. Then she tore it up and threw it away. The flight to Portland was smooth, but Rebecca spent most of it crying quietly into her complimentary tissues. She tried to tell herself she was doing the right thing, that this was best for everyone. But every mile that separated her from New York felt like another piece of her heart being ripped away. Portland was beautiful, green and clean, with mountains visible in the distance. The job Margaret had arranged was at a small accounting firm that handled some of Crawford Technologies' West Coast operations. Her supervisor, Janet Williams, was a kind woman in her 40s who didn't ask too many questions. About Rebecca's sudden arrival. "Single mother, huh?" Janet said on Rebecca's first day. "Well, you'll fit right in here. Half our staff are single parents. We're very family-friendly." Rebecca settled into a routine. Work during the day, childbirth classes in the evening, long walks through the city's numerous parks on weekends. She found a small apartment near a good school district and tried to build a life for herself and her unborn child. But she couldn't escape reminders of Ethan. Crawford Technologies was everywhere, their logo on buildings, their products in stores. Their stock price quoted on the business news she couldn't help watching. 2 weeks after her arrival in Portland, she saw a brief segment about the upcoming Crawford-Ashworth wedding. The reporter gushed about the romance of the century, the merger of two powerful families, the fairy tale love story. Rebecca turned off the television and went for a walk instead. Her daughter was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in April, 2 weeks before Ethan's scheduled wedding date. Rebecca held the tiny, perfect baby and whispered promises about the life they'd build together. She named her Sophia after her grandmother. "She has your eyes," Janet observed when she visited the hospital. "But that's definitely her father's stubborn chin." Rebecca traced her finger along Sophia's delicate features, memorizing every detail. Her daughter was beautiful, healthy, and hers alone. Whatever sacrifices she'd made, whatever pain she'd endured, this perfect little person made it all worthwhile. The wedding coverage was impossible to avoid. Even in Portland, the society pages were full of details about the lavish ceremony, the celebrity guests, the designer dress that had taken 6 months to create. Rebecca tried not to look, but found herself drawn to the photographs like a moth to flame. Ethan looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his smile seemed forced. Victoria was radiant in yards of silk and lace, her veil trailing behind her like a white river. They looked like the perfect couple, the golden pair everyone expected them to be. Rebecca closed the newspaper and focused on feeding Sophia. Instead, the baby was 3 weeks old when Rebecca received an unexpected package. Inside was a small silver rattle engraved with Sophia's initials and a card that simply read, "Congratulations on your beautiful daughter. A friend." There was no return address, but Rebecca recognized the expensive stationery. Margaret Crawford had kept her word about the trust fund, but apparently couldn't resist this small gesture. Rebecca tucked the rattle away in Sophia's nursery, unsure how she felt about the gift. Life in Portland was peaceful, if lonely. Rebecca made friends with other mothers in her building, found a reliable babysitter, and threw herself into being the best mother she could be. Sophia was an easy baby, sleeping through the night early and rewarding Rebecca's efforts with gummy smiles and delighted giggles. Sometimes, Rebecca would catch herself wondering what Ethan was doing, whether he was happy in his new marriage, whether he ever thought about her. But she pushed those thoughts away. That chapter of her life was closed, and dwelling on what might have been would only bring pain, or so she told herself. The package arrived on a Thursday morning when Sophia was 6 months old. Rebecca was getting ready for work, bouncing the baby on her hip while trying to drink her coffee, when the doorbell rang. The delivery man handed her a thick manila envelope marked "Urgent, Personal, and Confidential." Inside were legal documents that made her blood run cold. Custody papers. A private investigator's report with photos of her and Sophia at the park, at the grocery store, at the pediatrician's office. A letter from a high-powered law firm informing her that their client was seeking full custody of his daughter and that her immediate return to New York was required. The papers were signed by Ethan Crawford. He'd found them, and according to the legal documents, he was coming for Sophia. Rebecca's hands shook as she read the custody documents for the third time. Sophia babbling contentedly in her high chair, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the message was clear. Ethan wasn't just seeking visitation rights, he wanted full custody of their daughter. The phone rang, startling her from her panic. An unfamiliar New York number flashed on the screen. "Miss Martinez, this is David Chun from Whitmore and Associates. I represent Mr. Crawford in this custody matter." Rebecca's throat went dry. "How did you get this number?" "Mr. Crawford has been quite resourceful in locating you. I'm calling to inform you that he'll be arriving in Portland tomorrow morning. He'd like to meet with you before we proceed with formal hearings. I need a lawyer. That's your right, of course. But Miss Martinez, I'd encourage you to hear what my client has to say. This doesn't have to become a prolonged legal battle." After hanging up, Rebecca immediately called the one person she trusted for advice. Maria's voice crackled through the phone connection, filled with righteous indignation. "He can't just show up and demand custody after abandoning you for almost 2 years." "He didn't abandon us," Rebecca said quietly, bouncing Sophia on her lap. "He didn't know about her. Because his mother paid you to disappear. This is all kinds of messed up, Becca." Rebecca had never told Maria about Margaret's money, but her friend had always been perceptive. "How did you, please? Rich lady shows up. Next day you're on a plane to Oregon with a sudden job offer? I'm not stupid. The question is, does he know what his mother did?" That question haunted Rebecca through a sleepless night. Sophia seemed to sense her mother's distress, waking frequently and fussing until Rebecca walked the floors with her, whispering lullabies in Spanish that her grandmother had once sung to her. Ethan arrived at her apartment building at exactly 9 a.m., announced by the same nervous doorman who delivered the custody papers. Rebecca buzzed him up with trembling fingers, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she opened the door, the sight of him nearly brought her to her knees. He looked older, wearier, with new lines around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders. That spoke of sleepless nights. But it was the expression on his face when he saw Sophia, pure, overwhelming love mixed with desperate longing, that undid her completely. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She looks just like you." Sophia, perched on Rebecca's hip, studied this stranger with curious dark eyes. Then, as if recognizing something familiar, she reached out one chubby hand toward him. May I hold her?" Rebecca hesitated, then slowly transferred Sophia to his arms. The transformation was immediate and devastating. Ethan's entire face softened as he cradled their daughter, and Rebecca saw the man she'd fallen in love with, not the CEO, not the reluctant heir, but simply a father meeting his child for the first time. "Hello, beautiful girl," he murmured. And Sophia gurgled in response, her tiny fingers grasping at his tie. "I'm your daddy. I've been looking for you for so long." "How did you find us?" Rebecca asked, settling onto her couch as Ethan remained standing, unwilling to let go of Sophia. "I hired investigators the day after I saw you pregnant. It took them months to trace you here." His eyes never left their daughter's face. "Why didn't you tell me, Rebecca? Why did you run?" "You were getting married. You had obligations. I canceled the wedding." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" 3 days before the ceremony. "I called it off." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "I couldn't go through with it knowing you were carrying my child." Knowing I was still in love with you, Rebecca's world tilted sideways. But the merger, your mother said. My mother. His jaw tightened. What exactly did my mother say to you? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Rebecca could lie, could protect Margaret's secret, but looking at Ethan's face as he held their daughter, she found she couldn't. She offered me money to disappear. $200,000 and a job in Portland. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia, sensing the tension, began to fuss, and Ethan automatically began bouncing her gently, the motion seeming to come naturally to him. You took it, he said finally. It wasn't a question. For Sophia, I put it all in a trust fund for her future. You took my mother's money and disappeared with my daughter. The coldness in his voice made her flinch. I thought I was doing the right thing. She said the wedding was crucial for the business, that hundreds of jobs depended on it. So you decided for me. You decided what I could and couldn't handle, what choices I was allowed to make about my own life, my own child. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. He stood up, still holding Sophia, his composure finally cracking. You were afraid, so you ran. Just like you ran that night at the cafe instead of fighting for us. The accusation stung, because it held a grain of truth. And what would you have done, Ethan, really? If I'd told you about the pregnancy, would you have chosen us over your family's expectations? Over a $40 million merger? I guess we'll never know, will we? Because you didn't give me the chance. Sophia began crying in earnest now, sensing the conflict around her. Rebecca reached for her, but Ethan stepped back. She's my daughter too, he said quietly. I've missed 6 months of her life because of choices other people made for me. I won't miss any more. What are you saying? I'm saying I want custody. Joint custody, preferably, but if you fight me, I'll go for full custody and I'll win. I have resources you can't imagine, Rebecca. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The threat was delivered gently, but it was a threat nonetheless. Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her, the life she'd built in Portland suddenly feeling fragile as spun glass. You can't just take her from me. I'm her mother, and I'm her father. A father who's been denied any relationship with his child because of my mother's manipulation and your pride. My pride? Rebecca's voice rose, causing Sophia to cry harder. I gave up everything. I left my family, my city, the man I loved. You left the man you loved without giving him a choice. In his own future. They stared at each other across the small living room, years of hurt and misunderstanding crackling between them, while their daughter wailed in the middle of it all. Finally, Rebecca held out her arms. Please, she needs me. Ethan hesitated, then carefully transferred Sophia back to her mother. The baby immediately quieted, nestling against Rebecca's familiar warmth. The sight of them together, mother and child, so perfectly matched, seemed to deflate some of his anger. I don't want to take her from you, he said more quietly. But I won't be shut out of her life anymore. What do you want? I want us to figure this out, together, like we should have done from the beginning. Rebecca rocked Sophia gently, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The merger, what happened after you canceled the wedding? Victoria married someone else 6 months later. The Ashworths found other business partners. The world didn't end, Rebecca. It just changed. Your mother must have been furious. My mother and I aren't speaking. When I found out what she'd done, what she'd paid you to do ... He ran a hand through his hair. She's lucky I didn't have her arrested for interference with child custody. She thought she was protecting your interests. She thought she was maintaining control over my life. There's a difference. Sophia had fallen asleep in Rebecca's arms, her small body completely relaxed. Looking down at her daughter's perfect face, Rebecca felt the weight of every decision she'd made over the past year. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to be parents together. How to give Sophia what she deserves, two parents who love her more than their own pride. The words held hope and challenge in equal measure. Rebecca knew that accepting his proposal would mean opening her carefully constructed new life to chaos and uncertainty. But looking at the way Ethan had held their daughter, the love in his eyes when he looked at Sophia, she also knew she couldn't keep running forever. I'll need time to think about this, to figure out what's best for Sophia. Of course, but Rebecca? He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm not going anywhere this time. I'm staying in Portland until we work this out. After he left, Rebecca sat in her quiet apartment, holding their sleeping daughter and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the smartest decision she'd ever made. The coffee shop where Rebecca agreed to meet Ethan. The next morning was busy with the usual Portland crowd, students with laptops, business people grabbing their caffeine fix, and young parents like herself juggling strollers and diaper bags. She'd chosen it precisely because it was public, neutral territory where neither of them could raise their voices without drawing unwanted attention. Ethan was already waiting when she arrived, Sophia strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. He looked out of place among the casual Pacific Northwest crowd in his expensive suit, but his face lit up when he saw their daughter. She seems to like being close to you, he observed as Rebecca settled across from him. She's used to it. It's been just the two of us since she was born. The reminder hung between them, another milestone he'd missed, another choice that had been made without his input. But instead of the anger she'd expected, Rebecca saw only regret in his eyes. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. She began carefully, about figuring this out together. And I need to know what that actually means. Are you talking about shared custody? Moving back to New York? What's your endgame here, Ethan? He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. I don't have an endgame. I just know I want to be Sophia's father, not some stranger who sends birthday cards twice a year. That's not an answer, because I don't have all the answers yet. His honesty surprised her. I've spent the last 6 months trying to find you both. I didn't really think beyond that. Sophia stirred in her carrier, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. Without thinking, Rebecca began the gentle swaying motion that usually kept her content for a few more minutes. You're a natural at this, Ethan said quietly. I had to be. There wasn't anyone else to figure it out. The criticism in her words wasn't lost on him. I know you resent me for not being there. I don't resent you. I resent the situation. I resent your mother for manipulating us both. I resent having to make impossible choices. She paused, looking down at Sophia's sleepy face. But I don't resent you. Then help me understand. Walk me through these 6 months. I want to know everything I missed. So she did. She told him about the difficult pregnancy alone, about the terror of going into labor with only a taxi driver for company. She described Sophia's first smile, her first laugh, the way she reached for books even though she couldn't hold them yet. Ethan listened with the intensity of a man memorizing every detail, occasionally asking questions that revealed how much he wished he'd been there. She has your laugh, Rebecca found herself saying. When something really delights her, she throws her whole body into it. What delights her? Music. Any kind of music. And she loves being read to, even though she mostly just tries to eat the books. For the first time since he'd arrived in Portland, Ethan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. My mother used to say I did the same thing. The mention of Margaret Crawford killed the moment of warmth between them. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, feeling Sophia wake up fully in her carrier. Speaking of your mother, what happens when she finds out you're here? That you found us? She already knows. I told her before I left New York, and she threatened to cut me off from the family fortune, disown me publicly, and destroy my reputation in business circles. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather. Rebecca stared at him. Ethan, you can't. Your whole life is tied up in that company. My whole old life was tied up in that company. I'm building a new one now. What does that mean? Sophia was fully awake now, looking around the coffee shop with bright, curious eyes. Several other customers had noticed her and were smiling in that universal way people did around babies. It means I've started my own company. Crawford Industries is dead to me. Has been since I found out what my mother did to keep us apart. The magnitude of what he was saying hit Rebecca like a physical blow. You gave up everything. Your inheritance. Your family legacy. I gave up a prison I never wanted to be in anyway. Remember what I told you that first night. I wanted to be a teacher, not a CEO. But starting a new company, that takes capital, connections. I have some money of my own, investments my mother couldn't touch. And I have ideas, patents I developed independently. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be mine. Sophia chose that moment to let out a demanding cry that meant she was hungry. Rebecca automatically began bouncing her, but the baby was having none of it. I should feed her, Rebecca said, looking around the crowded coffee shop. There's a family restroom. In the back, Ethan suggested, then caught himself. Sorry, I don't know why I would know that. Actually, how do you know that? He looked embarrassed. I may have spent some time yesterday researching baby-friendly places in Portland. Just in case. The admission was so unexpectedly sweet that Rebecca felt her carefully maintained walls crack a little. Come with me, she heard herself saying. I mean, if you want to learn how to feed her... The family restroom was small but clean, with a comfortable chair clearly designed for nursing mothers. Rebecca settled Sophia in her arms and began the feeding routine, acutely aware of Ethan watching every movement. She's so small, he murmured. She was smaller, 7 pounds 2 ounces when she was born. Were you scared? Being alone, I mean. Rebecca considered lying, maintaining the strong front she'd perfected over the past months. But something about the quiet intimacy of the moment, the way Ethan was looking at their daughter with such wonder, made honesty feel safer than pretense. Terrified, she admitted. I kept thinking about what would happen if something went wrong. If she got sick and I couldn't afford the medical bills, if I lost my job and couldn't support her. You don't have to worry about money anymore. Whatever happens between us, I'll make sure Sophia has everything she needs. I don't want your money, Ethan. I told you that yesterday. This isn't about you, it's about her. His voice was gentle, but firm. She's my daughter too, and I won't let her want for anything just because her parents are too proud to work together. Sophia finished eating and immediately began the process of falling back asleep, her small body relaxing completely. Against Rebecca's chest. The sight seemed to mesmerize Ethan. Can I try? He asked quietly. Rebecca hesitated, then carefully transferred the drowsy baby to his arms. Sophia fussed for a moment, then settled against his shoulder with a contented sigh. She likes you, Rebecca observed, surprised by how natural he looked holding her. She barely knows me. Babies are good judges of character. My grandmother always said that. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Sophia sleep. Finally, Ethan spoke. I have a proposal. Not a legal one, just an idea. I'm listening. Stay in Portland. I'll relocate here, find office space for my new company. We can try co-parenting without lawyers and custody agreements hanging over our heads. You'd move here? Give up New York? New York was my father's city, my mother's world. Portland could be ours, Sophia's. The offer was more generous than Rebecca had dared hope for, but it also felt too good to be true. What's the catch? No. Catch. Just a chance to see if we can do this right. If we can be the kind of parents Sophia deserves. Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But all she saw was sincerity and hope and love for their daughter. That matched her own. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I can ask. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Sophia still sleeping peacefully in Ethan's arms, Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, she wasn't facing parenthood completely alone. It was terrifying and hopeful. In equal measure, maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. 3 weeks later, Rebecca found herself standing in the lobby of a sleek downtown Portland office building, Sophia babbling happily in her stroller as they waited for the elevator. Ethan had asked them to see his new workspace, and despite her lingering reservations about their complicated situation, curiosity had won out. The elevator opened to reveal a modest but modern office space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Unlike the intimidating corporate fortress of Crawford Technologies, this felt approachable, human-scaled. "Welcome to Phoenix Tech Solutions," Ethan said, appearing from behind a reception desk that was clearly still being assembled. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was dust on his expensive shirt. "You're building the furniture yourself?" Rebecca asked, amused. "Turns out startup budgets don't include professional installation services." He grinned, and for a moment she glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd rolled up his sleeves to help knead bread in her grandmother's kitchen. Sophia made an excited sound and reached toward the large windows. Ethan immediately moved to unbuckle her from the stroller. "Want to see the river, princess?" he murmured, lifting her easily. The nickname had emerged naturally over their recent meetings, and hearing it still made Rebecca's chest tight with emotions she wasn't ready to examine. "What kind of technology solutions?" Rebecca asked, following them to the windows. "Green energy software mainly. Programs that help small businesses optimize their energy usage, reduce waste." His voice took on the passionate tone she remembered from their long-ago conversations about changing the world. "It's what I always wanted to work on at Crawford Tech, but the board was too focused on the big corporate contracts. Sounds like the kind of thing that could actually make a difference. That's the idea. Though I'll admit, the learning curve for running your own company is steeper than I expected." Sophia was pressing her palms against the window, fascinated by the view of the river and the bridges spanning it. Ethan held her securely, unconsciously swaying in the gentle motion that had become second nature to Rebecca. "She loves being up high," Rebecca observed. "There's a spot in my apartment building stairwell where you can see Mount Hood, and she always gets excited when we pass it." "Mount Hood," Ethan repeated thoughtfully. "I drove out there last weekend, just to see it. Hard to believe I lived in New York for 30 years and never realized what I was missing." The admission revealed more than he probably intended. Ethan wasn't just relocating his business, he was rebuilding his entire life from scratch. The weight of that sacrifice, made for a daughter he'd known for less than a month, wasn't lost on Rebecca. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked quietly, "about leaving everything behind?" He turned from the window, Sophia still in his arms, and met her eyes directly. "Only about the time I wasted before." The intensity in his gaze made her look away. Over the past few weeks, they'd fallen into a careful routine coffee dates where Ethan could spend time with Sophia, visits to the park where he pushed the stroller while Rebecca pointed out landmarks, quiet dinners at family-friendly restaurants, where they negotiated the delicate balance of co-parenting without crossing into more dangerous emotional territory. But moments like this, when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the depth of his feelings, reminded her how precarious their arrangement really was. "I should probably get her home for her nap," Rebecca said, reaching for Sophia. "Actually, would you mind staying a bit longer? I have something I wanted to discuss with you." "About Sophia?" "About all of us." Rebecca's pulse quickened, but she nodded. Ethan settled Sophia back in her stroller with a collection of toys that he'd somehow acquired, another sign of how quickly he was adapting to fatherhood. "I've been thinking about our living situation," he began carefully. "Our living situation? Separate apartments across town from each other isn't very efficient for co-parenting." Especially when Sophia gets older and has a more complex schedule. Rebecca tensed. What are you suggesting? I found a house. A big house. It has a separate apartment above the garage that would be perfect for you and Sophia, but still close enough that we could share parenting duties easily. The proposal was practical, reasonable, and absolutely terrifying. Ethan, we can't just play house because we have a baby together. I'm not suggesting we play house. I'm suggesting we make parenting easier on all of us, especially Sophia. She could have her own room in both spaces, consistency, stability. And what happens when you start dating someone? When you bring home a girlfriend who doesn't want your ex-girlfriend living in the backyard. You're not my ex-girlfriend, you're Sophia's mother. The distinction felt important, though Rebecca couldn't quite articulate why. That doesn't answer my question. Then I'll answer it directly. I'm not looking to date anyone. I'm focused on building this company and being Sophia's father. That's enough for now. Sophia chose that moment to drop her favorite toy, a stuffed elephant that Ethan had brought her the week before. It rolled under a desk, and Ethan immediately went to retrieve it, brushing off the dust before handing it back to her. Besides, he continued, wouldn't the same question apply to you? What happens when you start dating? I'm not, Rebecca started, then stopped. The truth was, she hadn't even considered dating since Sophia was born. Between work, motherhood, and now navigating this complex situation with Ethan, romance felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. It would be practical, Ethan pressed gently. Separate but connected. Sophia could have two parents who are actually present in her daily life. I need to think about it. Of course, but Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm serious about this. About being here, about being her father. This isn't some whim that I'm going to get bored with in 6 months. How can I know that? How can anyone know that? Because I've already given up everything else. My family, my inheritance, the life I knew for 30 years. Sophia is my future now. Both of you are. The both of you hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address directly. Sophia, blissfully unaware of the adult complications swirling around her, had managed to get her elephant's trunk stuck in her mouth and was gumming it contentedly. I should really get her home, Rebecca said again, this time more firmly. Let me drive you. I brought the car seat. The drive to Rebecca's apartment was quiet except for Sophia's happy babbling from the back seat. Ethan had clearly researched car seats with the same methodical thoroughness he'd once applied to business deals, and the one he'd purchased was top of the line in every way. You don't have to walk us up, Rebecca said as he pulled into her building's parking lot. I want to. They rode the elevator in silence, Sophia drowsy from the car ride and the stimulation of the new environment. At Rebecca's door, Ethan lingered, clearly reluctant to leave. The house, he said suddenly. Would you at least look at it? Before you make a decision? Rebecca fumbled with her keys, Sophia heavy in her arms. Ethan, just look. That's all. I'm asking. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. Okay, I'll look. The smile that spread across his face was radiant with hope, and Rebecca felt her carefully constructed defenses crack a little more. As she watched him walk back to the elevator, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the smartest decision of her life or the most dangerous one. Inside her apartment, she laid Sophia down for her nap and stood by the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere out there, Ethan was building a new life, creating a future that he wanted to include both of them in. The question was whether she was brave enough to let him. The house was nothing like what Rebecca had expected. Instead of the sprawling mansion she'd imagined, it was a charming craftsman-style home in the Alberta Arts District, with a well-maintained garden and the promised apartment above a converted garage. The neighborhood buzzed with young families, artists, and the kind of community energy that made Portland feel like home. The main house has 3 bedrooms. Ethan explained as they walked through the space, Sophia secured in her carrier against Rebecca's chest. I figured one could be an office, one for me, and one that could be Sophia's room when she stays over. And the apartment? 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, separate entrance. Completely private, but close enough that we could share parenting duties without it being complicated. Rebecca examined the space above the garage with a critical eye. It was bright and airy, with skylights that would give Sophia plenty of natural light during the day. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bedrooms were larger than what she had in her current apartment. The rent would be whatever you're paying now, Ethan added quickly. This isn't about money. Everything's about money when you have as much of it as you do. I don't actually, not anymore. His tone was matter-of-fact. Starting over from scratch has been humbling in ways I didn't expect. Sophia had fallen asleep during their tour, her small body completely relaxed against Rebecca's chest. The motion of walking always soothed her, and the new environment had tired her out. She's gotten so much bigger, Ethan observed, gently touching one tiny fist that had escaped from her blanket. She's almost 7 months old. They grow fast at this age. I know. I've been reading about infant development. He caught her surprised look and smiled sheepishly, extensively. Did you know she should start crawling any day now? She's already starting to push herself up on her hands and knees during tummy time. I'd like to be there when she does it for the first time, if that's okay with you. The request was tentative, hopeful, and Rebecca felt the familiar tug in her chest. Over the past month, she'd watched Ethan transform himself with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to business deals. He'd learned to change diapers, mastered the art of burping after feedings, and could soothe Sophia's fussing almost as effectively as Rebecca could. The apartment is nice, she admitted, looking around the sunny living space. But I'm scared. The honesty surprised her. I'm scared of what happens when this stops working. When the novelty wears off and you realize how hard parenting actually is long-term. You think I'm going to abandon her? I think you're a good man who's never had to deal with a screaming baby at 3 a.m. every night for a month. Or a toddler who won't eat anything but crackers for a week. Or a teenager who hates everything about their life and blames you for existing. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're right, I don't know what any of that feels like. But I want to learn. I want to be the kind of father who doesn't run when things get difficult. Your father did. My father was more interested in building an empire than raising a son. I don't want to be him. They stood in the empty apartment, Sophia sleeping peacefully between them, and Rebecca felt the weight of a decision that would shape all their futures. I need to ask you something, she said finally. And I need you to be completely honest. Okay, is this really about Sophia? Or is it about us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan met her gaze directly, and she saw him wrestling with an answer. Both, he said finally. I want to be Sophia's father. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope we could find our way back to each other too. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking for a chance. For all of us to be a family, whatever that looks like. Before Rebecca could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from her work. She glanced at the screen and sighed. I have to take this. Emergency at the office. The call was indeed an emergency, a computer crash that had wiped out several client files, and Rebecca's expertise in data recovery was needed immediately. By the time she hung up, Sophia was awake and fussing. I have to go to work, Rebecca sighed, bouncing Sophia gently. Mrs. Patterson can't watch her today, her grandkids are visiting. I'll take her, Ethan said immediately. Ethan, you have your own work. My work can wait. She's my daughter too, remember? Rebecca hesitated. Leaving Sophia with Ethan for an entire afternoon felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. But looking at his eager expression, the way he automatically reached for the diaper bag she'd dropped, she realized he was right. Sophia was his daughter too. Her schedule is pretty simple. Bottle at 2, nap around 3:30, another bottle at 5. She likes to be walked around when she's fussy, and that elephant toy is her favorite, Rebecca. Ethan's hand touched her arm gently. We'll be fine. Go save your client's data. The afternoon passed in a blur of technical troubleshooting and data recovery. Rebecca managed to restore most of the lost files, but it took longer than expected. By the time she was finished, it was nearly 6 p.m. and she realized she hadn't heard from Ethan all day. Racing back to his office, she found him on the floor of his workspace, Sophia lying on a blanket nearby, both of them surrounded by scattered papers and what appeared to be the remains of a presentation. "What happened here?" Rebecca asked, taking in the chaos. "Sophia had opinions about my business plan," Ethan said with a rueful grin. "Apparently she's not impressed with my projected revenue streams." Sophia, seeing her mother, immediately began the happy babbling that meant she wanted to be picked up. Rebecca scooped her daughter into her arms, noting that she smelled clean and seemed perfectly content. "How did it really go?" "She's incredible," Ethan said, beginning to gather the scattered papers. "We went for a walk, she had lunch, took a perfect nap, and then helped me redesign my entire business model by systematically destroying my charts. I'm sorry about the presentation. Don't be. It was probably boring anyway. She has excellent taste." Rebecca looked around the office, noting the portable crib in the corner, the high-end stroller, the collection of toys she didn't recognize. "You bought baby furniture for your office?" "I figured if we're going to make this co-parenting thing work, I should be prepared for anything." The casual way he said, "we" sent a flutter through Rebecca's chest. Somewhere during the afternoon of single-handedly caring for Sophia, Ethan had stopped being a visitor in their lives and started being a partner. "The house," she said suddenly. "I want to see the lease." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Really? Really? But I have conditions. Name them." 6-month trial period. If it doesn't work out, no lawyers, no custody battles, no drama. We figure out something else like civilized adults. Agreed. And we need boundaries. Clear boundaries about what we are and aren't to each other. What kind of boundaries? Rebecca adjusted Sophia in her arms, buying herself time to think. We're co-parents. Friends, maybe, eventually. But not anything more. Not until we're sure this arrangement is about Sophia and not about trying to recapture something that might not have been real in the first place. The words hurt to say, but she needed to protect herself. Needed to protect Sophia from the fallout if this experiment in family building failed. "Understood," Ethan said quietly. "Co-parents and friends." "Co-parents and friends," she repeated, though the phrase felt incomplete even as she said it. Moving day came 2 weeks later. Rebecca had expected the transition to be awkward, but instead, it felt surprisingly natural. Ethan helped carry boxes, assembled Sophia's new crib, and somehow produced exactly the right dinner from a nearby Thai restaurant when they were too tired to cook. "This feels surreal," Rebecca admitted as they sat on the porch steps sharing pad thai while Sophia napped in her new room. Good surreal or bad surreal? I'm not sure yet. That first week set the pattern for their new life. Ethan would take Sophia in the mornings when Rebecca went to work early, and she'd take over in the afternoons when he had client meetings. They shared dinner preparation, took turns with nighttime feedings, and somehow managed to create a rhythm that worked for all of them. Sophia thrived in the new environment. She crawled for the first time on a Tuesday evening. Much to Ethan's delight, he happened to be on the floor playing with her, when she suddenly lurched forward and made it halfway across the living room. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen to find both of them looking equally surprised and pleased. "Did you see that?" Ethan called out, his face radiant with pride. "She's mobile. Better baby-proof everything," Rebecca laughed. but inside she felt the bittersweet pang of a milestone shared. This was what she'd imagined family could be like, two parents, celebrating their child's achievements together. The moment of perfect domestic harmony was interrupted by the doorbell. Rebecca answered it to find Margaret Crawford standing on the porch, looking as imperious and out of place as she had in Rebecca's old apartment. "Mrs. Crawford," Rebecca said, her stomach dropping. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my granddaughter. And to talk to my son, who has been ignoring my calls for 3 months." Ethan appeared behind Rebecca, Sophia in his arms, his expression immediately shutting down. "Mother." "Hello, Ethan. Lovely house. Very quaint." The tension in the air was palpable. Sophia, sensing something was wrong, began to fuss, and Margaret's eyes immediately fixed on her. "She's beautiful," Margaret said, her voice softer than Rebecca had ever heard it. "She has your eyes, Ethan." "What do you want, Mother?" "I want to meet my granddaughter. And I want to apologize." The last sentence hung in the air like a foreign language. Rebecca had never imagined Margaret Crawford apologizing to anyone for anything. Apologize for what, specifically? Ethan's voice was cold. "For interfering. For thinking I knew what was best for your life without asking what you wanted." Margaret's gaze shifted to Rebecca. "For bribing Miss Martinez to disappear instead of trusting you to make your own choices." Rebecca felt Ethan's sharp look, but kept her eyes on Margaret. "What changed your mind, seeing what my interference cost? My son won't speak to me. I've never met my granddaughter. And the company I spent 30 years building is struggling. Because Ethan was the heart of it, whether I wanted to admit that or not. So this is about business," Rebecca said. "This is about family." Margaret stepped closer, her carefully composed facade cracking slightly. "I've lost my son because I was more concerned with protecting what I thought our family should be than celebrating what it actually was." Sophia had calmed down and was studying this new person with curious eyes. Margaret looked at her granddaughter with an expression Rebecca had never seen before, vulnerable, hopeful, and utterly smitten. "May I hold her?" Margaret asked quietly. Ethan and Rebecca exchanged glances. Finally, Ethan stepped forward and carefully transferred Sophia to her grandmother's arms. The transformation was immediate and startling. Margaret's entire demeanor softened as she held the baby. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your grandmother. I've been waiting so long to meet you." Sophia, apparently unimpressed by family drama, grabbed Margaret's expensive necklace and tried to put it in her mouth. "She's teething," Rebecca explained automatically. "Everything goes in the mouth right now. Of course it does. You're exploring the world, aren't you, darling?" Margaret looked up at them both. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I'd like to be part of her life. Part of all your lives if you'll let me." "That depends," Ethan said carefully. "Are you here to accept our choices or to try to change them?" "I'm here to accept whatever makes you happy, both of you." Margaret stayed for dinner, sitting on the floor to play with Sophia, sharing stories about Ethan's childhood that made him groan with embarrassment, and treating Rebecca with a respect that felt genuine rather than calculated. "She's not what I expected," Rebecca admitted to Ethan later that evening as they cleaned up the kitchen together. "People can surprise you. Sometimes it just takes a grandchild to bring out their better angels. Is this really working?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "This whole arrangement?" Ethan stopped loading the dishwasher and looked at her. "Do you think it's working?" "I think Sophia is happy. I think you're a better father than I ever imagined you could be. I think we're building something that feels like family. But I'm scared of wanting more than we agreed to. Of crossing those boundaries we set." Ethan moved closer, his eyes searching her face. "What if we both want to cross them?" "Do we?" Instead of answering with words, he reached up and touched her face, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone. "I never stopped loving you, Rebecca. Not for a single day in almost 2 years. Ethan ... I know we said co-parents and friends. I know we agreed to boundaries. But watching you with Sophia, living in this house with you, sharing this life, I can't pretend anymore that friendship is enough." Rebecca felt herself leaning into his touch despite every rational thought in her head. What if it doesn't work? What if we mess this up? What if we don't? What if we get this right? The question hung between them, full of possibility and risk in equal measure. In the background, they could hear Sophia babbling happily to herself. In her crib, safe and loved and surrounded by family. "I'm scared," Rebecca whispered. "So am I, but maybe being scared together is better than being safe apart." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown all at once. It tasted like forgiveness and hope and the promise of tomorrow. "So," Ethan murmured against her lips, "should we renegotiate those boundaries?" Rebecca laughed, surprising herself. "I think we just did." 6 months later, Sophia took her first steps in the garden behind their house, wobbling between Rebecca's outstretched arms and Ethan's encouraging voice. Margaret, who had become a devoted grandmother despite her rocky start, captured the moment. On her phone with tears in her eyes. "Look at her go," Ethan marveled as Sophia made it all the way across the grass before plopping down with a delighted giggle. "She's going to be running by next month," Rebecca predicted, scooping up their daughter. "For congratulations and hugs." "And then we'll really be in trouble," Ethan said. But his smile was pure joy. That evening, after Sophia was asleep and Margaret had returned to her hotel, Rebecca and Ethan sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Portland sky. In shades of pink and gold. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. Rebecca thought about the question seriously. The past year had been challenging in ways she'd never anticipated, but it had also been more rewarding than she'd dared to hope. They'd built something together, not just a relationship, but a family. A real family, messy and complicated, and absolutely perfect. "Just one," she said finally. "What's that?" "I regret not trusting us sooner. Not believing that love could be enough to figure everything else out." Ethan tightened his arms around her. "We figured it out eventually. We did. And look at what we built." Through the window, they could see Sophia's nursery, softly lit by the nightlight that cast dancing animals on the walls. Their daughter was safe, loved, and surrounded by family, both the one she was born into and the one they'd chosen to create together. "I love you," Rebecca said, the words as natural as breathing now. "I love you too, both of you, always." And as the Portland evening settled around them, full of promise and possibility, Rebecca knew they'd finally found their way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.